Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, July 10, 2025. A federal judge blocks President Donald Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship nationwide by certifying a class action lawsuit. Senate takes up the first judicial nomination of the second Trump administration, passing a procedural vote for Whitney Hermandorfer to be a federal appeals court judge for the Sixth Circuit. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson tells a meeting of the Indianapolis Bar Assn what keeps her up at night. She says it's the state of U.S. democracy. Senate Appropriations Committee gets started on the first three fiscal year 2026 federal spending bills, even though there's no agreement between Republicans and Democrats on how much total spending there should be. And one of those bills is put in limbo after a Democratic amendment passes to block President Donald Trump's decision to move the FBI headquarters to the Reagan Int'l Trade Building in Washington instead of a site in Greenbelt, Maryland that had been chosen after a long competition. And then Republicans withdraw support from the underlying spending bill. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he had a frank conversation with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and expressed the United States' frustration over not making progress to end the war in Ukraine. Secretary Rubio also asked about someone impersonating him in texts and calls using artificial intelligence, contacting foreign ministers. That and much more coming up on Washington Today. USA Today writes a federal judge again barred President Donald Trump's administration from enforcing his executive order limiting birthright citizenship nationwide after the Supreme Court restricted the ability of judges to block his policies using nationwide injunctions. U.S. District Judge Joseph LaPlante in Concord, New Hampshire, made the ruling July 10th after immigrant rights groups implored him to grant class action status to a lawsuit they filed seeking to represent any babies whose citizenship status would be threatened by implementation of Trump's directive. LaPlante agreed the plaintiffs could proceed as a class, allowing him to issue a fresh judicial order blocking implementation of the Republican president's policy nationally. The question of whether to issue an injunction was not a close call, he said, noting children could be deprived of U.S. citizenship if Trump's order took effect. That's irreparable harm. Citizenship alone, he said, it's the greatest privilege that exists in the world. That was from USA Today. The order is in place for 7 days, allowing the Trump administration to appeal. The Senate today advanced the nomination of Whitney Hermandorfer to be a judge on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, the first judicial nominee in President Trump's second term the Senate has considered. The vote was 51-43, party line, to invoke cloture, which ends debate. A confirmation vote will happen on Monday. Politico writes that Whitney Hermandorfer, who has worked in the Tennessee Attorney General's office, clerked for Supreme Court Justices Samuel Alito and Amy Coney Barrett. She also clerked for then D.C. Circuit Judge Brett Kavanaugh, who is now on the Supreme Court as well. That was from Politico. Ahead of the procedural vote, some Senate floor debate. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, chairs the Judiciary Committee.
Ms. Hermandorfer is President Trump's first judicial nominee, and she's really is a home run pick, or to use a more appropriate expression for a former baseball or basketball player, her nomination is nothing but net. Ms. Hermandorfer list of accolades is something to behold. She graduated magna cum laude, Princeton University, and was co-captain of her basketball team. She was valedictorian at George Washington Law School and clerked for 3 of the current Supreme Court justices, as well as another federal judge. Currently, Ms. Hermandorfer is Director of Strategic Litigation Unit in the Tennessee Attorney General's office and has led some of the most important litigation in our country, including a recent victory before the Supreme Court. At her hearing, we witnessed firsthand her impressive intellect, composure under pressure, professionalism, and collegial nature. Her performance at her hearing was no surprise to anyone who knows her. Her nominations had been praised by practitioners and academics from across the political spectrum. They understand that Ms. Hermandorfer is dedicated to following the rule of law not to advancing her preferred policy outcomes. Too often, we've seen judges play policymaker instead of being just simply a jurist.
Senator Chuck Grassley, Judiciary Committee Chair, Republican of Iowa, on the Senate floor before the successful procedural vote to advance this nomination. Confirmation vote will be next week. Courthouse News writes that if confirmed, Hermandorfer will represent a key milestone in the second Trump administration, marking the president's first federal judge approved by the Senate this term, and she'll be the first White House court nominee in decades to be confirmed without formal vetting from the country's foremost legal professional organization. The Justice Department in May announced that it would no longer give the American Bar Association privileged access to non-public information on White House judicial nominees, such as their bar records, which the organization has historically used to draft its ratings. Attorney General Pam Bondi accused the ABA of being an activist group and claimed that the organization has favored the nominees of Democratic presidents. That was from Courthouse News. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, spoke against the nomination.
Later today, Senate Republicans will hold the first procedural vote on a judicial nominee in Donald Trump's second term, Whitney Hermandorfer, to be a circuit judge on the Sixth Circuit. Everyone knows that for Donald Trump's judges, one thing has always mattered most: loyalty to him. Not experience, not independence, not knowledge of the law, not even following the rule of law. When it comes to judges, Donald Trump cares only about one thing: fealty. He doesn't care about the law, precedent, or even what the Constitution says. He only wants them to do whatever he wants, no matter how baseless or irrational it is. A quick glance at Ms. Hermandorfer's background shows she is unqualified to serve on the bench. She has less than 10 years of legal experience. She has never served as the sole or chief counsel on a single case that was tried to verdict. Indeed, she has made a career out of going after people's reproductive rights, their transgender rights, and anti-discrimination policies. At the Tennessee Attorney General's office, she has tried to strike down protections for employees who need reproductive care. She supported Donald Trump's firing of more than a dozen inspector generals, even filing an amicus brief on behalf of Tennessee. The list of reasons why Ms. Hermandorfer would make a terrible judge goes on and on and on. If Ms. Hermandorfer is the standard for Donald Trump's judges in his second term, then it's clear Republicans learned nothing from the first time around. The American people don't want Donald Trump's foot soldiers wearing black robes. They want experienced, fair, and independent jurists committed to upholding the law. Ms. Hermandorfer falls way short of the mark, and I oppose her nomination.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. The Senate did vote along party lines, 51-43, in a procedural vote to advance the nomination of Whitney Hermandorfer for a federal judge. Confirmation vote will be on Monday. ABC News reporting on another judicial nominee from President Trump. Attorneys for a fired DOJ official turned whistleblower released a series of emails and texts Thursday that they say bolster claims that Emil Bove, a top Trump appointee to the Justice Department, now in line for a powerful judicial appointment, repeatedly suggested defying orders from courts to enforce the administration's immigration policies. The messages from former immigration attorney Erez Ruveni provide a real-time look at the internal scramble among top Justice Department and other administration officials as they sought to defend the legality of several rush deportation efforts that have since become the subject of high-stakes legal challenges. Emil Bove is up for third U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals judge. A vote in the Senate Judiciary Committee could happen next week. From CNN, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the court's most junior member and a member of its liberal wing, told an audience in Indianapolis on Thursday that she was concerned about the state of American democracy. After speaking about the book she published last year, Jackson was asked during a lightning round of questioning what keeps her up at night. That was from CNN. Here's the exchange.
What keeps you up at night?
I would say the state of our democracy. I would say that I am really very interested in getting people to focus and to invest and to pay attention to what is happening in our country and in our government.
Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in Indianapolis. Again, from the CNN article, she did not mention President Trump by name during her remarks at the Indianapolis Bar Association. She weighed in on the administration's criticism of the judiciary earlier this year, as well as during an event in Puerto Rico in which she also did not mention Trump specifically. In recent weeks, Jackson has emerged as a forceful dissenter in several high-profile cases involving Trump. She wrote a scorching dissent in the court's blockbuster decision last month that curbed the power of lower courts to issue temporary orders blocking the president's policy. The case dealt with Trump's effort to end birthright citizenship through an executive order. And that was from CNN. Here is Justice Jackson at today's program, asked about how she decides when and how to write dissents.
The current makeup of the court means that you are sometimes in the minority.
Sometimes.
How do you decide when you're going to issue a dissent?
You know, I dissent, well, first of all, just in terms of the sheer mechanics. There are 9 justices on the court, and when we do our conference vote, we know within a few days of the oral argument how the court has voted in a case. And sometimes it'll take months for us to get the opinion out, but we know internally. And the most senior, the justice with the most seniority on the majority side and on the minority side is responsible for making the assignments. So, you know, in a case that we have a lot of unanimity, actually, in a lot of our cases, but in a split decision, let's say it's a 6-3 decision, with, you know, me, Justice Sotomayor, and Justice Kagan in the minority, Justice Sotomayor will decide who's going to write the dissent, the principal dissent. Sometimes she will assign one to me. It just depends on the way in which the cases are breaking down. But then there are some times when, even after the principal dissent is written, I have a slightly different perspective or a different take on something, or this is an issue of particular importance to me for whatever reason, where I will say, forgive me, Justice Sotomayor, but I need to write on this case. And it's because I feel like I might have something to offer and something to add, and I'm not afraid to use my voice. So, you know, it really depends on the issue and the circumstances. Yeah.
Now, I know when you do issue a dissent, the opinions are circulated before they're issued.
Yes.
So sometimes the majority writer can address the dissent.
Yes.
In the majority opinion, and as I've said to people, sometimes it isn't the what you're saying, it's the how. Does that ever hurt your feelings, more the how than the what?
I have a very thick skin.
Yes, you do.
I do. I mean, maybe that's part of the blessing. We go all the way back to the beginning, talking about what your parents gave to you.
Yeah.
You know, my parents gave to me a sense of my own ability to write and to speak out and to say what I have to say and to not be really offended by other people saying what they have to say. So I actually don't get my feelings hurt. What I do is I try to respond as effectively as I can in my writings.
Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson today at the Indianapolis Bar Association program in Indy. This is Washington Today. Story from Punchbowl News. They write, "We wrote Wednesday that there's a chance the federal government could shut down sometime this fall. Today is a good example why. The Senate Appropriations Committee often passes each of its 12 annual spending bills on a bipartisan basis. This is what makes the Senate and not the House. Yet the Senate Appropriations panel has its first fiscal year 2026 markup this morning, and senators still don't have a deal on what they want to spend this year. There's also no sense that they'll be able to reach one. That was the reporting from Punchbowl News. Today, there were 3 of the 12 fiscal year 2026 spending bills before the committee, dealing with commerce, justice, and science, agriculture, rural development, and FDA, and legislative branch. The committee chair, Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, said these bills were put together with the input of Republicans, Democrats, and independents.
92 senators contributed to the 3 bills we will consider today, submitting more than 6,500 requests. Let me repeat that one more time. 92 senators submitted 6,500 requests, each of which was carefully reviewed by the subcommittees. These member-driven bills are a product of that intensive effort. They fund important priorities, including agricultural research, food and medical product safety, law enforcement priorities related to counterterrorism and fentanyl, and legislative branch offices that support Congress as we carry out our constitutional duties. There is no doubt that this is a challenging legislative environment. We are currently operating under a year-long continuing resolution. The delays in completing the fiscal year 2025 process and the fact that we are in the first year of a new administration contributed to a late budget request from OMB. So this has made it more difficult for the committee. But I would point out that this scenario is not unprecedented. In previous years, the Congress proceeded under the same pressures and chose to move ahead with bipartisan bills. I urge my colleagues to follow a similar path and to do so with a renewed commitment to advancing bills not only through committee, but also across the Senate floor.
Senator Susan Collins, the Appropriations Committee chair, Republican from Maine, at today's markup. The committee's ranking Democrat, Patty Murray of Washington State, said that she would vote for today's 3 spending bills that are before the committee to keep the budget process moving forward. But she also said the $9.4 billion rescissions package to cut money from foreign aid and global health programs and public TV and radio broadcasting the Senate will vote on next week creates a situation that tests bipartisanship.
Working together to across the aisle to look where it makes sense to cut or rescind or reform. I believe that is the path to our collective success. And I hope my colleagues work with us on this offer and reject the rescissions package next week. So as we mark up this legislation today, I hope we all keep our eye on what comes next. We have 9 more bills to get across the finish line, and these are decisions that will help us get there. And there are decisions that will make that task a lot harder, if not impossible. I spoke about this last week at the hearing with Director Vogt. This markup, these bills, they show the potential of this committee when it works best. We have a powerful role here where we can do a lot of good for the communities we represent. But I will warn everyone again, this committee is not powerful just because. It is powerful because we are able to work together to secure investments that actually become law. But if we choose to ignore that, this committee can and will lose its power. If we start passing partisan cuts to bipartisan deals, how are we ever supposed to work together? That is not hypothetical. That is a real question that will be posed by any party line rescission package. There are 2 roads before us right now. There's the road we peered down at the last hearing, the road where this becomes the rescissions committee, looking at package after package of cuts, fighting over how much of the last deal that we will unravel, fighting over whose projects get canceled, whose community gets robbed. And there is the road that we are taking a step down today, the bipartisan road where we actually work together, where we stand together and get investments back home to the people who sent us here.
The Appropriations Committee ranking Democrat, Patty Murray of Washington State at today's markup of the first three of the fiscal year 2026 spending bills. About that rescissions package, the Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, telling reporters today the first vote related to it, it's $9.4 billion, could come next Tuesday. It has already passed the House, and the deadline to have it signed into law, or it expires, is July 18th. About the fiscal year 2026 spending, again from the Punchbowl News article, the two sides appear to have a tacit agreement on two bills, agriculture and legislative branch, to spend slightly more than fiscal year 2025. This puts the Senate at odds with House Republicans in the White House, which are seeking tens of billions of dollars in cuts to non-defense discretionary spending, aka social programs. However, the third bill, Commerce, Justice, Science, has become a partisan battleground over one of President Donald Trump's long-standing targets, the FBI. Trump administration has decided to move the FBI out of its decrepit Pennsylvania Avenue headquarters and into the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center near the White House. Administration officials will divert $555 million already approved by Congress to help pay for the move, and they're not asking for permission from lawmakers to make this dramatic shift. The problem here is the Maryland congressional delegation won a contentious bidding process back in 2023 to build a new multi-billion-dollar FBI campus in Greenbelt, Maryland. This was going to bring lots of money and jobs to Prince George's County. That was from Punchbowl News. At today's markup, Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, offered an amendment that required the FBI to move to the Greenbelt site.
Years ago, it was decided not just that the current FBI headquarters is inadequate, but for security reasons and to meet the mission requirements of the FBI, they needed a new site. And as part of that security component, they decided it was important to move the FBI to a campus-like setting, like we have for the CIA, like we have for the NSA. And a long process was entered into. There were two sites in Maryland that were looked at. There was one site in Virginia. We all appeared before joint committees of the FBI and GSA, and ultimately a decision was made that it would be in the best interests of the FBI to move to the Greenbelt, Maryland site. Well, as Senator Murray indicated a few weeks ago, the administration just announced that it wanted to snatch the $555 million that had been set aside for a down payment on that selected site and use it instead to move the FBI into the Ronald Reagan building. No analysis done with respect to security requirements, no analysis done with respect to FBI mission requirements, no review of the underlying statute as to the purpose of the Ronald Reagan building, no analysis of what they would do with current tenants in that building.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, at today's Appropriations Committee markup, offering his amendment to require that the FBI only move to the Greenbelt site and not where the president wants the move, to the Reagan Building in Washington, D.C. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, Republican of Oklahoma, opposed the amendment.
To make the assumption that the FBI would possibly put their men and women in a less secure building is laughable. And for the fact that Congress would be able to know better to choose a site than the FBI, when that is their job, they're an intel agency. They know security, I promise you, better than all of us. This is what they fight. They fight threats, home, here, and abroad to some degree. For us to try to micromanage their site planning is ridiculous. They're not going to put their men and women at harm. We need to allow them to make a decision. We haven't been able to make a decision, nor do we make a decision. We allow and support their decision that they make, and all we're doing here is supporting that decision. But for us to debate that they would, for a security concern, is anybody in here professional in that area? Anybody on the Democrat side a professional in that area? Anybody here ever chose a site for security purposes? Ever looked at hard sites versus easy targets? I have. I know it well. And I would assume we need to lean in and trust these individuals, because we're not talking about Republicans or Democrats. We're talking about the FBI. And I strongly oppose this. We're micromanaging the FBI. And by the way, at that point, any other agency from making decisions on their own. We have to trust the experts as we put them in place. In this circumstances, it's the FBI.
Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, Republican from Oklahoma, at today's Appropriations Committee markup. Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, supported the amendment from Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen, blocking the FBI from moving any place but Greenbelt, Maryland, and she provided the margin of victory in the vote.
I very much respect my colleague from Oklahoma in saying the FBI, they look to the security aspects of facilities, and they're not going to put themselves in a place that that would not be wise. But in fairness, I don't know what that review is. I don't think any of us know what that review is. My understanding is that this has been a decision that was made just very recently. So I, for one, would like to know that this analysis has actually been going on for more than just a couple months, that there's actually been that effort to ensure that we're going to move forward. This is the right place. And it's the right place not for a Trump administration, not for a Biden administration, not for a John Ossoff administration, but this is the right place for the FBI. So, sorry, I didn't mean to start any rumors. A Mike Rounds administration, how about that? That's better, yeah.
Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska, before the vote in the Appropriations Committee to pass Senator Chris Van Hollen's amendment that would require that the FBI headquarters only move from its current Hoover Building site in Washington, D.C. to the Greenbelt, Maryland site chosen by the General Services Administration in a competition in 2023, and not to the Reagan Building in Washington as the president wants. The vote was 15-14, Murkowski voting yes. But that's not the end of the story. Politico writes the prospect that the bill might countermand a Trump administration priority subsequently caused several GOP senators to withdraw the support for the underlying bill. Attempts at pursuing compromise language on the FBI headquarters matter failed, prompting Senator Susan Collins, the committee chair, to call what she said would be a very long recess. The panel is not expected to reconvene before next week. And note that the other two spending bills before the committee, dealing with agriculture and legislative branch, did pass the committee. This is Washington today. And now to the deadly floods in central Texas. NBC News writes that authorities have confirmed at least 120 deaths across 6 counties, including those of 60 adults and 36 children in Kerr County. There are still 173 people missing. As the hopes of locating survivors has dwindled, search and rescue operations along the Guadalupe River have shifted to a recovery phase. That was from NBC News. Jonathan Lamb, the Kerrville Police Department Community Services Officer, spoke at the Daily News Conference in Kerrville.
The response here in Kerr County continues to expand as the mission becomes more technical. There's more than 2,100 responders on the ground here from state, local, and federal agencies working to reunite victims with families. 10 states have sent specially trained teams to our community, and 2 more states are en route. As I know many of you have reported, the governor, lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House are strongly committed to helping our community. And we're grateful that they're making our recovery a priority in the upcoming special legislative session. Our City of Kerrville and Kerr County leadership are committed to a transparent and full review of processes and protocols. The special session is going to be a starting point for that work, but our entire focus since day one has been on rescue and reunification, which leads me to our latest report. As of 8 a.m. this morning, there have been 96 confirmed deaths, 60 adults and 36 children. The number of missing remains at 161, and there remain 5 campers and 1 counselor from Camp Mystic among the missing.
Jonathan Lamb, a Kerrville Police Department Community Services Officer at today's news conference in Kerrville, Texas. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump are scheduled to tour the flood-damaged areas of Texas on Friday. Wildfire response was a topic today as U.S. Forest Service Chief Tom Schultz testified before the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee about the agency's fiscal year 2026 budget request. The Hill writes the request unveiled in May includes steep cuts to the NFS workforce while prioritizing forest management, including timber sales, hazardous fuels removal, mineral extraction, grazing, and wildlife habitat management. It also consolidates fire mitigation efforts across several departments. Schultz is a former lumber executive who was tapped by President Trump to lead the agency after the previous chief stepped down in February. That was from The Hill. Here's part of the hearing. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, asking about wildfires.
The lack of emergency preparedness, whether it's in Texas Hill Country or public lands in Oregon, can cost lives. Just recently, fire officials in Southern Oregon told me they were coming up dangerously short in emergency preparedness. Specifically, I was told in Southern Oregon, one meteorologist is trying to provide early warning systems and doing the work for 4 people. Now, what this, of course, is all about is getting key, timely information out to communities so they can battle these infernos. We've talked in the past about these infernos are not your grandfather's fires. They're bigger and they're hotter, and we need to address this critical preparedness gap. Now, instead of moving quickly, you all have trotted out yet another new and described as improved reorganization in the middle of a very dangerous fire season. Now, nobody in my home state, and I was chair of this committee and worked closely with the agency, has in effect said, Ron, we got to have the Forest Service less involved in fighting fires. But that is the net effect of your organizational plan. So here's my question. What is this new plan going to accomplish for preparedness in my home state this fire season? That's what I was asked about. What can be done this fire season, and how is this new organizational plan going to get real help to people quickly?
Senator Wyden, thank you for the question. So this fire season, we do not intend to implement any changes in the structure of the fire program. Nothing is going to take place this fire season.
So why aren't we using the resources that seem to be going to this new plan to get help to the people who are telling me they're coming up short? Why wouldn't we get that help out to them quickly?
So just in terms of resources this year, so here's where we're at today. So our max staffing that we typically hire for firefighters, GS9 and below, is 11,300 firefighters. Today we're at 11,250 roughly firefighters. So we are at about 99% of our hiring resources. So in terms of firefighting capacity, we're there. So we've not made any changes to our resource availability this year, whether it's aviation resources or...
Why don't you get me in writing something that backs up your argument that there's been no reduction in resources? Because that's not what I was just told in Southern Oregon, where they're worried about getting urgently needed information.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, questioning U.S. Forest Service Chief Tom Schultz at today's Energy and Natural Resources Committee hearing. Chief also was asked about the repeal last month of the 2001 roadless rule that affects nearly 59 million acres of the National Forest Service. You can find the video of the hearing in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. And from E&E News, Democrats in the Senate and House proposing a $30 billion expansion of forest projects to reduce wildfire threats, which they said would counteract Trump administration cuts to certain forest grant programs. Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon and Val Hoyle of Oregon introduced companion bills. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea, it's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, writes Associated Press, said Thursday that the U.S. and Russia have exchanged new ideas for Ukraine peace talks after he met with his Russian counterpart in Malaysia Thursday. In a statement released shortly after the meeting, Russia's foreign ministry said that substantive and frank exchange of views had taken place on issues including Ukraine, Iran, Syria, and other global problems. The two men held talks in Kuala Lumpur on the sidelines of the annual Association of Southeast Asian Nations Regional Forum, which brings together 10 ASEAN members and their most important diplomatic partners, including Russia, China, Japan, South Korea, European nations, and the U.S. That was from Associated Press. Secretary Rubio spoke at a news conference in Malaysia.
What was your message to the Russian foreign minister today, and what is the Trump administration's strategy now to end the Ukraine war?
Well, our strategy is to continue to engage all the parties that are involved in finding an outcome to this conflict. We will engage any time that we have an opportunity to do so, like we did today. I echoed what the president has said, both a disappointment and frustration at the lack of progress in peace talks or in a path forward. So we'll continue to engage. We shared some ideas and comments, which I'll take back to Washington as early as this evening in terms of calls and reflected, and perhaps there's something to build on there. But it was a frank conversation. It was an important one. We had it, and we talked about some other items as well and related to the war in Ukraine, but that was obviously the first and foremost topic that we discussed. And look, the president's been pretty clear. He's disappointed and frustrated that there's not been more flexibility on the Russian side to bring about an end to this conflict. And we hope that can change. And we're going to continue to stay involved where we see opportunities to make a difference.
Without speaking for the foreign minister, which I know you don't want to do.
Which foreign minister?
This one.
Oh,
Mr. Lavrov.
Yes.
Yeah, without speaking for him, did you get the sense that they're moving towards flexibility? Or
yeah, I'm not going to characterize our conversation other than to tell you that I expressed what the president has said publicly, which is that we feel as if we've dedicated a lot of time and energy to this matter, and just not enough progress has been made. We need to see a roadmap moving forward about how this conflict can conclude. And then we shared some ideas about what that might look like, and obviously I'll take that back to the president here as early as this evening, and hopefully there's something that we can build on there, but we'll find out.
A couple of months ago you said that what was necessary to end this war would be a conversation between President Trump and President Putin, but there have now been multiple phone calls between the two of them, and yet the war in Ukraine goes on. Does this speak to any weakness in terms of the president's ability to negotiate an end to this conflict, or why does it persist despite them having spoken?
Well, this is a war that the president inherited, right? He got elected and it had already been going on, and no progress had been made to that point towards peace of any kind. In fact, there had not even been any meetings between the Ukrainians and the Russians for quite some time. So while there's been some humanitarian exchanges made, obviously that's our goal here, is to end this war and any role we can play. So this is not a war that started under President Trump. It's a war that wouldn't have happened had he been president, but now it's here. And we'll continue to engage and do everything we can and hopefully make progress. As I said, and I've said repeatedly, look, if we see an opportunity to make a difference in this, we're going to take it and we're going to pursue it. And that's what the president has done. And he deserves tremendous credit for having multiple phone calls with leaders from both countries and anybody else.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio at a news conference at the ASEAN Leaders Summit in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Story from Reuters: Russia unleashed heavy airstrikes on Ukraine on Thursday before a conference in Rome in which Kyiv won billions of dollars in aid pledges, and U.S.-Russian talks at which Washington voiced frustration with Moscow over the war. 2 people were killed, 23 were wounded, and there was damage in nearly every part of Kyiv from missile and drone attacks on the capital and other parts of Ukraine. Reporting from Reuters. Secretary Rubio at his news conference was also asked about the State Department's recent warning to U.S. diplomats of attempts to impersonate Secretary Rubio and possibly other officials using artificial intelligence after an impersonator posing as Rubio did try to contact foreign ministers.
All right.
AI impersonator of you? Anything you can say about who was behind that?
No, I mean, it could happen to anybody. I mean, everybody, especially if you're a public figure, they just got to get enough, like they could take the interview out of here today and change it around. So, but, as soon as I found out about it last week, I referred it to the FBI, diplomatic security, and others. It won't be the last time you see me or others, for that matter. Maybe some of you will be impersonated. But it's just a reality of this AI technology that's going on, and it's a real threat.
How did you find out?
Oh, somebody called me. It was a senator that called me and said, "Hey, did you just try to reach me?" And actually sent me a voice recording. It doesn't really sound like me. Maybe you fell for that call, but maybe there was a better one that I didn't see, but.
It was on Signal, right? So does this?
I don't know how they got it or if it was a voicemail. No, it doesn't matter what form you use. It doesn't matter if it's Signal or anything else.
There are more secure methods that in Signal, you can create an account with an email address, and that was one of the reasons that they were able to reach out to people and then use the voicemail messages to imitate your voice.
I've had people in the past ask me if I texted them. Like within days of becoming Secretary of State, I had foreign ministers calling the State Department asking if I had just texted them. So I don't know, guys. This is just the reality of the 21st century with AI and fake stuff that's going on. It's generally, I communicate with my counterparts around the world through official channels for a reason, and that's to avoid this.
Do you have any sense of who the perpetrators are?
No, you're not gonna have any sense. The perpetrator is somebody with an AI software. That could be anybody in the world. My sense is the target really isn't me. The target is the people they're reaching out to try to trick them into a call or whatever, and who knows what they do with it. But you're going to hear about this for a long time. Not just me. It'll happen to other people because all you need is a recording of someone's voice and you can come up with it. So, it's just one of the other great challenges posed to us by AI. I'm sure there's a lot of positive aspects to AI as well, but this ain't one of them.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the news conference at the close of the ASEAN Leaders Summit in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Some other news from the summit. Al Jazeera reports that China has agreed to sign the Southeast Asian Treaty banning nuclear weapons. Malaysia's and China's foreign ministers confirmed in a move that seeks to shield the area from rising global security tensions amid the threat of imminent United States tariffs. Speaking of tariffs, this from Reuters shares a Brazilian plane maker, Embraer, fell sharply on Thursday after U.S. President Donald Trump said he would impose a 50% tariff on all imports from the South American country. Analysts warn that the world's third largest aircraft manufacturer, which has a huge market in the U.S. for its executive planes and regional jetliners, would be one of the firms most affected by the tariffs. That was from Reuters. The Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. held a forum today looking at the Trump administration's policies on tariffs and other policies that affect manufacturing, such as taxes. Two of the panelists were Charles Crane, National Association of Manufacturers Managing Vice President of Policy, and John Hazen White, Executive Chairman of Taco Comfort Solutions, which sells pumps, valves, tanks, and heat exchangers. First, Charles Crane.
When you think about tariff policy, manufacturers support the president's goal of driving domestic manufacturing growth. That's, in fact, why we're here today, right, to talk about how policymakers can incentivize and grow and support domestic manufacturing. The fact remains, of course, that manufacturing exists within a global supply chain. We've looked at sort of some of the numbers with respect to how those supply chains work across manufacturing. And what we found is that if the U.S. economy was operating at full capacity, which we know that it's not, right? There's 400,000 jobs open in manufacturing. But even if it were, we could only produce 84% of the inputs that manufacturers need to make things in America, here in America. So there is at absolute minimum a 16% of inputs that we need to import from somewhere else. These are raw materials, these are chemicals, these are energy resources. This is specialized equipment and machinery that may not be made here. Of course, we don't actually operate at full capacity, like I said. So in the real world, it's more like 67% that we can produce currently here in the U.S. So we really need to solve for that 30-ish% of outstanding inputs that we need to make things here. Again, that's the goal that we share. And so when you think about tariff policy, does it increase the cost of using those inputs here to make things here in America? And that's sort of the direction that we've really encouraged the administration to look. Manufacturers need inputs to make things, and we need export markets to sell things, right? And so we think that a common sense trade policy can allow for the president to achieve his trade policy goals without preventing manufacturers from investing here in America, which is a goal we all share.
So, John, your thoughts on tariffs and how it's affecting businesses?
Well, I think that if I were to take a broad brush approach to this topic, Right now, it's a little difficult to assess what's happening with tariffs. I mean, it's so confusing. First of all, there's tariffs, there's embargoes, there's trade zones, there's trade areas, there's all kinds of things associated with it's not just tariffs, but the tariff issue as it stands now is very confusing. It's unsettled, and as you've all seen, it changes daily practically with different countries. I mean, the Chinese tariff levels have shot up and down all over the place, and unfortunately, if we look back at a bit of our own history, there are certain core raw materials that go into manufacturing. Cast iron is one, steel is another, that essentially, not 100%, but to quite some extent, this country has regulated ourselves out of being able to produce. And what is produced here is frightfully expensive. So companies like mine have had to go to China and to India, and it's not a bad thing because these are great sources of supply with great quality and everything else. But we've had to go just to be able to be competitive in our own market, and all of us have done it. And so imposing these tariffs on us for products that we literally can't buy here is a little bit awkward. It's a little bit contradictory to what I think the intention is, which is to elevate our manufacturing. Tariffs are implemented for the purpose of driving business domestically, so that it's less attractive to import, from products, raw materials from China and other countries, and more. And this is particularly in the agricultural markets, another area where it makes our domestic products more affordable for people. The question is, what are the tariffs? And I think we have to wait to see, because, as you said, the 90 deals in 90 days aren't quite happening, right? And so it's going to take a while for this to settle and to see where it lands. But it's shaky. It's concerning.
John Hazen White, business owner at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. He's also a trustee at Brookings. Before that, you heard Charles Crane at National Association of Manufacturers, a forum on the Trump administration manufacturing policies. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 192, NASDAQ up 19, S&P up 17. C-SPAN's Capitol Hill producer Craig Kaplan writing on X, 50-45. The Senate along party lines confirmed Jonathan Gould to serve as the nation's top banking regulator as controller of the currency. He served as senior deputy controller and chief counsel at the OCC during the first Trump administration and is the office's first permanent chief since May 2020. NASA held a briefing today on the upcoming crew rotation to the International Space Station. NASA Associate Administrator Ken Bowersox said that this crew will be at the space station on its 25th anniversary.
We've got a great crew on this mission. All of our crews are great, but I think this one's especially notable. We've got two rookies, Zena Cardman and Oleg Platonov, and then we've also got two folks who've flown before, Camille Yui and Mike Fink. They'll be heading up to station here pretty soon. It's hard to believe we've had crews up there for over 25 years now, or close to 25 years. The station's been up there over 25 years. In October, we'll hit 25 years for continuous human presence on orbit. That's going to be a huge milestone, a great testament to the work of our commercial partners, our international partners, and the whole NASA team. The Crew 11 crew will join the 73 crew on orbit. AX4's up there with them now. They'll be coming home soon. That opens up some space for Crew 11. And then after Crew 11's been there a little while, has some handover time, the Crew 10 will come home and we'll get to welcome them back here on Earth.
NASA Associate Administrator Ken Bowersox at today's Crew 11 news conference. News Nation writes that the crew will be at the space station on the 25th anniversary of continuous human spaceflight and are taking memories from Earth with them on their trip. Most said they were taking photographs, and Mike Fink said he would also be carrying an Indian silk scarf known as a gamosa, a symbol of blessings from his wife's side of the family. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.